Hi everyone! About a year ago I received with the scroller box a pencil by Staedtler, and it's a Mars Lumograph and it's Aquarell, meaning it's a water-soluble graphite pencil. And I had only used it for that month's challenge, but I remembered it being very enjoyable. So recently I placed an order with Dick Blick, and it was just a few dollars short of getting a free shipping. So I checked and I found this little set for just a few bucks. And I wanted to try the different ranges of those pencils, and I believe there's only 3 kinds: the 4B, the 6B, and the 8B. And this set came with a brush as well. Now I also have a set of Derwent Graphitone, which are woodless pencils, and they're also water soluble, and I wanted to compare them on a sample sheet to see if there's any difference in darkness or any different properties. The Graphitones also come with a 2B. I swatched them all on a piece of Fabriano Artistico watercolor paper, and it's cold pressed, so it's a little grainy, not as much I believe as the Arch watercolor paper. And the tooth of the paper really allows the pigment to stay down on the paper. The only thing is I'm wondering if it'll be too grainy to draw with it. I don't particularly enjoy drawing or sketching on cold pressed watercolor paper. So I noticed that dried the Staedtler pencils erase pretty well, and the Graphitone not as much. Also the Staedtler seems to be a bit darker than the Graphitone, both when they are dry or wet. They don't really erase once they've been dissolved. The pigment slightly comes off, but you can't really call it erased. And they do not really re-wet. They do re-wet a bit, but you can't really spread the pigment anymore once it's dry. So the Staedtler Lumograph Aquarell don't seem very easy to find. I found that set on Dick Blick, but I can't really find any open stock, and I can't find them in very many stores. I've gone to some physical stores and I couldn't find any at all. And I'm not sure I'll be able to get a replacement if I need one. Let's get back to the paper for a minute. I mentioned that the cold pressed watercolor paper wasn't my favorite surface to draw on, and I thought that I should still use a watercolor paper, but I thought that hot press would be better because it's nice and smooth, and I would probably be able to get into more details that way. But it ended up not being that great because it's so smooth that the pencils really glide onto the surface, and it doesn't really grab onto the pigments as much. So in the end, it didn't seem like I had enough pigment to get a very dark tone. I decided to follow the instructions that's on the back of the package. It says to first sketch the basics with a 2B pencil onto watercolor paper, and the set doesn't come with a 2B pencil, and now I realize they probably meant to use a regular 2B pencil, not a water soluble one. But anyway, I used a 4B pencil because it was pretty light, kind of like a 2B pencil on this paper. Then it said to create shadows and dark areas with the 4, 6, and 8B pencils using a loose crosshatch stroke. Yeah, it was pretty loose on the paper, except for the hair that I tried to make a little more detailed. And then it says to dip the paintbrush in water and wash darker areas first to establish the values, and continue adding pencil and water as desired. So it's pretty much what I did. I went from the 4B pencil, I sketched, and then I watered it down. Then I used the 6B, it did the same thing, and then I used the 8B and did the same thing. And each time I saw that it was getting darker and darker, which was nice. But in my head, I still wanted to have some pencil strokes showing, but I think it's again because of the smooth paper. It seemed like I was not able to make the pencil show very well. It didn't grab onto the pigments as much as I wanted it to. So I ended up just going for the more watercolor look, which is fine. But, you know, I had something in mind that I was not able to produce, which was a bit frustrating. So I kept on going and trying to add darker values because to me, whenever there's a nice contrast, it brings the subject to life, makes it more 3D looking. And the reason why I'm drawing a horse, which is not a very common subject, I love horses, but for some reason I never draw them. Go figure. The package shows a beautiful drawing or painting, I'm not sure what you call it, of a horse, and it just inspired me. I decided to do one as well. So I found a pretty picture on Pixabay, and that's what I decided to draw. So I'm not quite sure, because I don't draw them very often, not really sure if the proportions are correct. It seems to me that the head is a little too short, but it could be just the angle, I'm not sure. Anyway, so that was a nice exercise for me. And when I was done, I realized that even the darker areas, they seemed too faint for my taste. So when I was done applying my last layer of the 8B pencil, I decided to try something else. And I was really hoping that it would allow me to get darker tones this time, like much darker. But to first test it out, I went back to the 4B pencil, and with a wet brush, I lifted the pigment straight from the tip of the pencil and applied it with the brush onto the paper, just like watercolor, because I wanted to smooth out all the marks that I had put on the paper and kind of unify everything. Pretty much right away I realized that the 4B was not dark enough, so I jumped straight back to the 8B, and until the rest of the painting, that's what I did. I just lifted the pigment straight from the 8B pencil and I added all the details that I wanted. It really helped me add some contrast. So I thought the painting was a bit plain without the background, so I wanted to add some kind of effect, and I really liked what the example shows on the package. So I tried to reproduce something similar. So I soaked an area of the paper with clean water, and I put some pigment on it because I wanted it to spread and look beautiful like watercolor does, but I was mistaken. And first, it's hot press paper, so usually the pigments don't spread as much. The second thing that I tried, because I wanted something really dark in that area, and sometimes when you use a water soluble pencil on wet paper, the pigment really looks very strong on the paper. So I tried that, and to my surprise, the lines showed very well and very dark, but I was not able to dissolve them at all. So now I'm stuck with a bunch of dark lines that I can't cover up. So I tried to add many layers of the black pigment onto the those black lines to cover them. And as the water was drying, the color was getting lighter and lighter, so it didn't really work out. I might later on end up just using watercolor and to cover it up, because it'll be a bit more opaque, or I think it'll work better. The last thing that I did to add a little fun to it was to get my brush really wet and rub it very fast onto the tip of my pencil, just to splash the pigment onto my paper and make it drip onto the paper. So I was a bit disappointed with the darkness of the pencils in contrast with the example that was shown on the package. So I decided to do another test. I ended up copying the example on the package just because it was right there and I thought it would be quick on the sketchbook. And this time I used cold press watercolor paper. Now I didn't use Arches or Fabriano Artistico. I used, it's my Pentalic 140-pound watercolor sketchbook. And so the grain is not as thick as with Arches paper. And I was able to draw and sketch without too much trouble. But something that I had in mind was that because the grain is thicker than on hot press paper, it would grab more onto the pigments, and that means there would be more pigment to dissolve on the paper. Therefore, it would be darker when I dissolved it with water, and I was correct. So those pencils work great, but you need to use a paper that does have a tooth so that there's enough pigment on the paper to get the tones that you like. So all in all, I like those pencils. They're fun. I did struggle to achieve the values that I wanted, that I had in mind. And it's probably because I've been painting monochromatic paintings lately with watercolor, and I got used to it, and I get used to be able to layer the pigments and work the values the way I wanted them. So this is not the same medium, and therefore I couldn't expect the same type of result. But all in all, it's a very fun medium, and I'll probably use it again. Thank you all for stopping by. I hope you liked this little review. I wish those pencils were more readily available. I'll see you soon with another video. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.